There's a certain kind of person who, after a long day of getting things done, real things, meaningful things, sits down at night and still feels like they haven't done enough. Not because they're ungrateful, not because they're performing dissatisfaction, but because somewhere inside there's a standard that keeps moving, a bar that rises exactly as fast as they do. And no matter how much ground they cover, the horizon stays the same distance away. People around them usually don't understand this. From the outside, it looks like ambition. Sometimes it gets labeled as workaholism, or an inability to relax, or a refusal to be present. The people closest to them occasionally ask, "Why can't you just be satisfied?" And that question, though well-meaning, lands somewhere tender, because the honest answer is, "I don't fully know." What's rarely explained, and almost never explained well, is that this isn't a personality flaw dressed up as productivity. It isn't restlessness without purpose. What's actually happening in people like this is a set of 7 specific mental systems working in combination. Systems, not traits, not character, not destiny. Recurring cognitive and psychological structures that shape how a person filters information, allocates attention, processes feedback, and relates to time and effort. And once you understand them as systems, they start to make a very different kind of sense. The first is selective filtering. The human brain receives approximately 11 million bits of information per second. It consciously processes around 40. What gets through is determined by a filtering system called the reticular activating system, a structure in the brainstem that acts as a gatekeeper between the external world and conscious awareness. In high achievers, this filter is calibrated differently. It has been trained, through years of repeated focus, to let through signals of relevance, progress, and discrepancy, the gap between where things are and where they could be. This is why the same environment that feels neutral to one person feels full of signal and friction to another. It's not that one is more sensitive, it's that their filter is tuned to a different frequency. The second system is what cognitive scientists call prospective memory combined with future self continuity. Research from the field of decision neuroscience shows that most people experience their future self almost like a stranger, a separate person whose needs and goals feel abstract. High achievers, often without realizing it, have a more continuous psychological relationship with who they are becoming. They make present decisions inside a mental simulation of a future they feel genuinely connected to. This doesn't make them better planners, it makes their sacrifices feel different, less like deprivation and more like investment. The third is frustration tolerance with a very specific texture. Not patience in the passive sense, something more active, the ability to stay cognitively engaged with a problem after it has stopped being interesting and before it has started being rewarding. Psychologists sometimes call this the valley of boredom, the phase between the dopamine hit of starting something and the satisfaction of finishing it. Most people exit this valley. High achievers have a nervous system that has learned, often through years of necessity, to stay inside it, often because early in their lives the cost of leaving was too high. The fourth is metacognitive monitoring, the mind watching itself think. Research in educational psychology consistently finds this to be one of the strongest predictors of learning and performance. It's not intelligence, it's the habit of standing slightly outside your own thinking and asking, is this approach working? Am I reasoning clearly here? What am I missing? Most people think. High achievers think about how they're thinking. The difference in outcomes is not minor. The fifth is what developmental psychologists describe as internalized motivation structure. Early in life, most people build their motivation system around external feedback, approval, grades, recognition, reward. Some people, through a combination of experience and necessity, develop a parallel internal structure, a set of standards, signals, and responses that exist entirely inside them and run whether or not anyone is watching. This isn't the same as not needing others. It's that the engine doesn't stall when the audience leaves. It keeps running on something quieter and harder to name. The sixth system is something that behavioral economists study under the label of asymmetric loss processing. The average person feels the pain of losing something roughly twice as intensely as the pleasure of gaining the equivalent. In high achievers, this asymmetry is still present, but it's been partially redirected. The loss they are most sensitive to isn't the loss of comfort or approval, it's the loss of potential, the cost of not becoming. The gap between what is and what could be registers in their nervous system with unusual force. This is what drives the late nights, not ambition as a performance, loss aversion aimed at the future self. The seventh system is the most subtle. It's the relationship between identity and effort. For most people, effort is something you apply to a task. It's external to who you are. For high achievers, effort, a specific kind of effortful engagement with difficulty, has become woven into the identity itself, not as something they do, as something they are. Psychologist Robert Vallerand, research on passion, distinguishes between harmonious passion, where an activity is part of the self without consuming it, and obsessive passion, where the activity is the self, and the line between doing and being collapses entirely. Both versions appear in high achievers. The distinction matters. None of this is a recommendation. None of this is presented as the right way to be wired. A person without these systems isn't failing at something, they're running a different set of priorities, and those priorities may serve their life far better. The brain is not a competition. These systems carry real costs, compressed presence, difficulty resting without guilt, an inner life that is rarely quiet. People who know high achievers closely sense this, even when they can't name it. There's something underneath the output that never fully settles. And here is the part that tends to go unsaid. Many of these systems were not chosen, they were built. The child who learned early that external validation was inconsistent developed internal standards to compensate. The person who spent years in environments where stopping meant falling behind learned to stay in the valley of boredom because exit was never safe. The teenager who found that performance brought the only form of recognition available developed an identity structure where effort and selfhood became nearly indistinguishable. These systems are intelligent, they are adaptive, they were the right response to the conditions that built them. Understanding that doesn't dismantle the systems, but it does change the relationship with them. If you recognized yourself in this, not in the flattering parts, but in the heavier parts, the parts that explain why rest feels like risk and stillness feels like falling behind, then what you're feeling right now probably isn't motivation. It's more like relief, like being seen without having to explain the complicated version. You are not broken for finding it hard to stop. You are not wrong for having a standard that moves. Your nervous system learned to do this for reasons that made sense at the time, and in many ways it still does. The question is not whether these systems work. They clearly do. The question worth sitting with is whether they are working for you or simply running on a program written a long time ago in a context that no longer exists. There's more to understand here. Specifically, what happens to these systems under pressure, under failure, under real loss, and why the same patterns that build quietly extraordinary things can, in certain conditions, quietly cost the person running them. If that feels worth exploring, it is.